Aristotle's lantern. It's a name that carries a certain prestige, evoking images of ancient Greek halls and flickering candlelight. If you saw this term in a museum catalog, you'd expect a delicate bronze artifact. But the reality is far more bizarre and a little more terrifying. In marine biology, this elegant name refers to one of the most brutal pieces of biological machinery on Earth, the five-toothed, rock-grinding jaw of a sea urchin. But here's the irony: if Aristotle were alive today, he would be utterly confused. He'd likely ask why we've named a set of rhythmic, demon-like teeth after his household lighting. We are essentially living with a 300-year-old clerical error that became scientific dogma. In his monumental work, The History of Animals, written over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle was a meticulous observer. When he looked at a sea urchin, he saw a geometric marvel. He wrote that the urchin's hollowed-out casing resembled a horn lantern, the kind used in ancient Greece, with translucent plates to protect the flame. He was describing the entire exterior shell, the spherical structure that holds the animal together. Fast forward to the 18th century. Naturalists translating these ancient texts made a monumental lost-in-translation move. Whether through poetic license or a simple misreading, they pinned the name Aristotle's lantern specifically to the internal jaw mechanism rather than the shell. It was a classic historical mistake. But the name was so evocative that the scientific community simply shrugged and kept it. The error became a legend. For the sea urchin, however, having a mad scientist vibe has always been its specialty. While we were busy arguing over what to call its mouth, this creature was busy surviving 500 million years of planetary chaos. It is a slow-moving fortress that carries a philosopher's name in its gut and an alien survival strategy in its DNA. And as we're about to see, this accidental lantern is just the beginning of a story that spans the rise and fall of prehistoric empires and a biological brilliance that is as beautiful as it is brutal. To truly understand the sea urchin, we have to travel back nearly 480 million years. Imagine a world where the continents were unrecognizable and the oceans were a chaotic, brutal marketplace of alien life. This was the Paleozoic era, a time when being a scavenger was a dangerous, high-stakes game. At this point in history, the ancestors of the urchins, the early echinoderms, were the cleanup crew of the deep. But in this neighborhood, if you weren't fast enough to grab the trash, you quickly became the trash. This evolutionary pressure forced a radical split in the family tree. One branch, the starfish, went all in on mobility. They developed flexible arms and tube feet to become fast, lethal hunters. But our protagonist, the sea urchin, chose a completely different path, the path of maximum protection. While the starfish were becoming ninjas, the sea urchins were becoming tanks. They realized that if you could make yourself too difficult to eat, you wouldn't need to run away. They began to fuse their skeletal plates into a solid, spherical fortress. It was a trade-off. They sacrificed almost all their speed for near invincibility. In the brutal eat-or-be-eaten lottery of the ancient seas, the urchin bet its entire future on heavy armor. But being a heavy, spiky ball created a massive logistical problem. These early speed demons moved at a blistering pace of just a few millimeters per second. When you move that slowly, you can't exactly chase down a meal. You are essentially a stationary target in a world full of hungry predators. This raised a desperate, life-or-death question that would define their entire existence. If you are too slow to hunt, and the ocean floor is a desert, how do you keep from starving? The answer would eventually be the lantern, but in these early days, the urchin was simply a survivor. It was a creature that learned to wait, to endure, and to outlast its enemies by being too stubborn to die. It wasn't the king of the food chain, but it was the king of the long game, a scavenger that would eventually watch the rise and fall of giants while tucked safely inside its spiky, armored shell. This commitment to staying put led to the creation of one of nature's most effective bunkers. While other creatures were developing eyes to see their hunters or fins to flee from them, the sea urchin was perfecting the art of living armor. It evolved to fuse its skeletal plates into a solid, spherical structure called a test. The goal was simple: eliminate all weak spots and reduce surface area to a minimum. But as the ancient oceans filled with giant sea scorpions and prehistoric fish with bone-crushing jaws, a smooth shell wasn't enough. The urchins needed a deterrent that sent a clear message: don't even try. So, they doubled down on their defense and weaponized their very skin. Those iconic spines we see today aren't just for show. They are sophisticated, mobile spears controlled by a complex system of muscles at their base. In the early Paleozoic, this setup was virtually unhackable. These spines prevented predators from getting a grip and stopped smaller scavengers from scraping the urchin's body for a quick snack. For millions of years, the sea urchin existed as a near-invincible fortress, but this extreme defense came with a heavy tax. By becoming a slow-moving, spiky ball, the urchin had backed itself into an evolutionary corner. You see, being a heavy tank is great for survival, but it's terrible for finding a buffet. As we've seen, these early urchins moved at a pace that made a snail look like a sprinter. In a world where food is scarce and competition is fierce, a stationary fortress is just a well-protected animal that's slowly starving to death. This brings us back to the mysterious lantern we started with. Because to survive as a slow-moving tank, the urchin didn't just need a mouth, it needed a high-tech power tool that could eat the very world around it. This brings us to the true mechanical marvel hidden inside that spiky fortress, the lantern itself. Because the sea urchin couldn't chase its prey, it evolved a tool that allowed it to eat the very environment it walked on. Imagine a machine with 5 independent, calcium-reinforced jaws, all working in perfect synchronicity to scrape, grind, and crush. This isn't just a mouth, it's a bioengineered power tool. The real genius, however, lies in a property that engineers today still struggle to replicate: self-sharpening. Most animals, including humans, have teeth that wear down over time. But the sea urchin's teeth are eternal blades. Each tooth is composed of alternating layers of hard calcite crystals and a softer organic matrix. As the urchin grinds away at solid rock or calcified algae, the softer layers wear away first. This process naturally chips the tooth into a fresh, razor-sharp edge. It is a blade that literally sharpens itself the more it is used. Armed with these self-sharpening eternal blades, the sea urchin became the ultimate survivor. When massive environmental shifts occurred, like the Devonian extinction that wiped out 75% of all species, the urchins were uniquely prepared. While the kings of the ocean died off because their food sources vanished, the urchins simply sat there. They could eat almost anything: kelp, coral, or even the bony stalks of ancient sea lilies. They were the ultimate low-maintenance residents of the deep. They could endure low-oxygen environments that would suffocate a fish, and they could find nutrients in places other animals found empty. They didn't need to be fast, and they didn't need to be smart. They just needed to keep grinding. By the time the world recovered from the Great Dying, the sea urchins weren't just survivors, they were ready to take over the empty niches left behind by the giants of the past. But as the world changed, the urchins didn't just stay the same. They began to experiment. They realized that if they had already mastered the art of the invincible tank, it was time to see just how weird they could truly get. Once the dinosaurs were cleared from the stage and the oceans began to stabilize, the sea urchins didn't just stay in their armored bubbles. They went into a period of radical, almost mad scientist experimentation. They realized that if they had already mastered the art of the invincible tank, they could afford to break a few rules. This era of evolution saw the rise of the irregularia, a group of urchins that decided the classic spiky ball look was so last era. Take the sand dollar, for instance. This creature looked at the heavy, spherical armor of its ancestors and decided to go flat. By becoming a thin, disc-like pancake, it could bury itself under the sand to avoid being tossed by violent waves. It even developed tiny hair-like spines to walk through the sediment like a miniature hovercraft. It was a complete evolutionary U-turn, moving from a fortress on the rocks to a ghost in the sand. Then there are the heart urchins, which abandoned the 5-sided symmetry that defines almost all other echinoderms. They became bilateral, meaning they have a distinct front and back, essentially trying to look like a normal animal for the first time in 480 million years. They even ditched the legendary Aristotle's lantern entirely, choosing instead to become peaceful sifters that breathe through specialized petals on their backs. But perhaps the most alien adaptation belongs to the purple sea urchin. These creatures evolved light-sensing proteins across their entire bodies, particularly in their tube feet. They don't have eyes in the way we do, But in a very real sense, they walk with their eyes. They can see a predator's shadow or a gap in the rocks simply by moving. This explosion of forms from the flat sand dollar to the light-sensing purple urchin wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about filling every possible corner of the ocean. Whether in the crushing depths of the abyss or the crashing surf of the shoreline, the urchin found a way to adapt its ancient blueprint. It proved that you don't need a brain to be a master of the environment. You just need enough time and a very flexible definition of what an animal should look like. But as we look at these bizarre survivors today, we have to ask ourselves, what can we actually learn from a creature that has spent 500 million years just staying the same? Because in the end, the story of the urchin isn't just about biology, it's a masterclass in the art of the long game. So, what have we actually learned from the sea urchin? In a world that prizes speed, intelligence, and constant innovation, the urchin is a stubborn reminder that sometimes the best way to win is simply to outlast everyone else. It is a masterclass in the art of the long game. From a 300-year-old naming error in ancient Greece to a high-tech tooth that literally sharpens itself by grinding against rocks, the urchin story is one of accidental legends and intentional brilliance. It has survived 5 major mass extinctions events that wiped out the dinosaurs, the giant sea scorpions, and the kings of the ocean by being too armored to eat and too simple to fail. It doesn't need a brain to navigate the Pacific, and it doesn't need eyes to see its enemies. It has turned its very skin into a weapon and its gut into a mechanical workshop, proving that evolution isn't always a straight line toward perfection. Sometimes, it's just a chaotic, spiky journey toward becoming the ultimate survivor. The next time you're walking along a rugged coastline and spot one of these purple or green fortresses tucked into a crevice, or better yet, the next time you're at a sushi bar tasting the rich, briny flavor of uni, take a second to remember the lantern. You aren't just looking at a slow-moving scavenger. You are looking at a 480 million year old blueprint that has remained virtually unchanged while the rest of the world rose and fell around it. The sea urchin teaches us that you don't have to be the fastest or the smartest to inherit the earth. You just need a solid defense, a tool that never gets dull, and the patience to wait for the giants to disappear. So, respect the lantern. It's been here long before us, and if history is any indication, it will likely be here long after we're gone. Just, maybe, watch where you step the next time you're at the beach.